Hello and welcome to our webcast for December 9, 2016. My name is Christian Lebré and this is Amy Asbrook, the Director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, and Chairman of the Board of EPC. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities in our lives. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disability. Today's topics: Quebec's euthanasia program after 1 year. And the second topic is Ottawa commit to adopt the CRPD optional protocol.
And the CRPD is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Yeah, it's very important.
Okay, thanks. So Quebec's euthanasia program after 1 year. Let's see. December 10th will mark 1 year since Quebec's euthanasia program came into effect. Today we'll talk a little about how the media and the government have tried to shape public opinion about the law, because neither the government nor the media has taken a neutral stance. Both have taken a stance to try to accelerate the program and promote the
euthanasia and assisted suicide.
Right, exactly.
They should have give information, but what they have done is promote it.
Right, exactly. Especially the media should be taking a neutral stance, but they take a very biased stance. Much of the information for our program today was provided by Aubert Martin, Executive Director of Living with Dignity. And we want to thank Aubert for that. He really did a great presentation, and we borrowed a lot of his presentation.
You work hard and you work well.
Right, exactly. Living with Dignity is a citizen network whose mission is to protect the life and the interest in the inherent dignity of people who have become vulnerable through illness, old age, or disability by ensuring that they receive compassionate support. So that's their mission, and part of that is providing information about what's happening with the Quebec project. Quebec's euthanasia law was passed on June 6, 2014, after a 4-year process of gathering public opinion and pushing a bill through the National Assembly. So it was gathering opinion, but it actually was slanting the opinion that it gathered. And
yes, because the majority was against, and they had told a lie.
Right.
They said the majority was
right.
for.
During the public consultation, a majority of people said that assisted suicide and euthanasia were a bad idea. However, when the report was issued by the Committee on the Question of Dying with Dignity, it recommended a program of euthanasia. So why did they do that if everybody was, well, not everybody, but 60% of the people who testified said were opposed to euthanasia and assisted suicide?
And even people, a group who was for that said, yes, we are for, but. There was a lot of but.
Right, and those people were calling for strict safeguards, and some safeguards got into the law, but a lot of others didn't get into the law, and it became a very slippery law. The law that was finally approved said that hospices and palliative care units would not be forced to perform euthanasia, since it would violate the principle of palliative care to neither accelerate nor delay natural death.
And this is the law. It was voted.
Right. This is I believe it's section 72 of the law, says that they can't be forced to perform euthanasias. So that's just some background, because as we'll see, there is a lot of pressure on hospices and palliative care units to perform euthanasias this year. So some important events and media articles this year include: on June 29th, 2016, although there was no complaint, the media singled out for criticism the McGill University Health Center's palliative care unit for transferring a patient in order to be euthanized.
Yeah, from the palliative care to another place in the same hospital.
Right, exactly. And no one complained about it except for the media. Quebec's health minister, well, actually, not just
they do everything every day for X-rays or whatever.
Exactly.
That's a normal procedure in an hospital.
Right, for moving people around from one place to another. But Quebec's health minister said that he wanted to quell the resistance. So he was thinking that this unit was resisting their policy of euthanasia.
No, they was just doing their job.
Rights. They were exercising their right and doing their job, which is not to accelerate nor to delay death. So on June 30th, 2016, the work of many physicians is criticized by the Oversight Commission on End-of-Life Care, stating that in some cases, doctors have not met the criteria that the patient must be at the end of life. So already they had detected that some people who were euthanized weren't at the end of life, and the Commission on End-of-Life Care criticized some physicians for doing euthanasias in those cases where people weren't actually at the end of life. And in fact, they shouldn't have been euthanized if they're not eligible for euthanasia. They shouldn't be euthanized.
We have to respect that law, and we have to remember that the euthanasia and assisted suicide, it's not a right. It's an exception over the law who forbid to kill somebody.
Exactly.
It's just an exception. It's not a right.
Right. It just means that the people who commit murder are not going to be prosecuted for murder.
Yeah.
But in fact, these people didn't comply with the law, and so they should be prosecuted for murder.
Normally, yes. But in the same law, they say you should not prosecute a doctor who tried to do it in a good way.
In good faith. Yeah. Right. So that's a kind of, that's a big loophole, big enough to drive a truck through.
Yeah.
So if the doctor says, but I was doing it in good faith, then he gets
finished. Nobody could do anything about it.
Right, exactly. On July 4th of 2016, the McGill University Health Center is officially forced to euthanize patients who request euthanasia within its palliative care unit. So that's the Minister of Health again, Gaëtan Barrette, who is forcing the palliative care unit at McGill.
Unbelievable. It should be the guy who should make the law respected.
Right.
And look what he did.
Right. He himself is violating the law.
Yeah.
Which said that hospices and palliative care units don't have to euthanize people. He's violating it by saying they're forced to euthanize people.
But at the same law, there is a kind of overlap over things of law which doesn't make things very clear. In the same law, it says that every public institution must do the assisted suicide or euthanasia in Quebec. And this is overlapping the other one who said it should not be forced in palliative care. So you see the trouble over there.
Yep, because Gaëtan Barrette, the health minister, used his power as the public minister to force the public institution to do the euthanasia.
In my book, the institution, the McGill particularly, made the exact meaning of the law. They transfer the patient to another place in the hospital and do the euthanasia. And the palliative care was still a palliative care unit. But for Gaëtan Barrette, it was a violation over the law, which is not at all.
Right, exactly. For July 7th, 2016, 6 months after the law came into effect, there have been 253 requests and 166 euthanasia, I'm sorry. So they said that there would be maybe 50 to 100 requests for this exceptional year for this exceptional procedure for exceptional cases.
And look what happened.
There were 253 requests in 6 months and 166 euthanasia.
And it will follow what happened in Belgium. It will accelerate because this law doesn't have any tooth to bite.
Right, exactly. And one thing that came out in the 6-month report it's not noted there, but there's a discrepancy between the number of euthanasias reported by facilities and the number of doctors' reports of euthanasias they performed that came in.
Some.
Right, there were some doctors either that didn't report or the reports didn't get there in time. They're supposed to be reported within 10 days.
And we doesn't want to charge the doctor, but put yourself in their place. They are overcharged over a lot of paper, and you add to this procedure, and in the law it says you will not be prosecuted. So the paperwork.
Right. But the problem is, this is life and death, and this is complying with a life or death law.
That's the difference.
And, it's not just a little paperwork to keep keep the files straight. This is really important. And if doctors are not reporting the euthanasias they perform, that's not complying with the law. And again, they don't deserve the exception to the homicide law if they're not complying with it. So it's a dangerous precedent, basically.
Yeah, from far away, it was supposed to be a very simple thing. And as much as you look in, it's more and more and more complicated.
Right.
It's not a simple subject.
Right.
We study it for many years, and we still have things to learn.
Right, and we know already in Belgium and other places that doctors don't report. And this is evidence that here in Quebec as well, doctors aren't reporting the euthanasias that they perform. And that was after only 6 months.
Yeah, and be aware, it's happening in Quebec, but don't worry, it will happen to the rest of Canada too.
Right, exactly. July 13th, 2016, the Quebec government adopts new ministerial directives to bring the practice of euthanasia in Quebec in line with the new federal law. So the new federal law being Bill C-14, which passed in June of this year, 2016, and that law had a couple of differences. One is that said that there should be a delay of 10 days unless there's a real urgent need for the person to.
There is exception. There is 2 doctors, and if both said it's an emergency, the guy or the woman will die very soon and suffer too much, they have the right to do it within the 10 days, even within hours.
Right.
Okay. The 10 days is just for people who ask for, and it's not an emergency.
Right, exactly. And the other difference between the 2 laws is in Quebec, the person has to be at the end of life, but that's not defined really in the law. But at the federal law, the person's death has to be reasonably foreseeable in order for them to be eligible.
Yeah, and it's even less
defined.
So the door is even more wide to pass in.
Right.
With the truck or even the crane, whatever it will be, if you want a boat.
Right. So this was the Quebec government trying to adopt some new guidelines to bring it in line with the federal law, but it just created more confusion, I think, for many people.
Yeah.
August 17th, 2016, Quebec's Minister of Health, again, launches another public attack against a hospice for refusing to provide euthanasia within its walls. So this wasn't a unit, a palliative care unit in a hospital. This was a hospice, a freestanding hospice.
Yeah, but as far as I know, they had give some palliative care too. but they are
No,
not.
that's what a hospice is.
Yeah.
It's a palliative care
Yeah.
organization.
Yeah, but it's not called a palliative care unit.
Well, it's a freestanding it's a freestanding place.
Yeah.
And that's what a hospice is palliative care.
Yeah.
So he attacked this organization for not performing euthanasias, again, in violation of the Quebec law.
Of their own law of the Quebec.
Right, that says that hospices are exempt from being obliged to provide euthanasia. On August 30th, 2016, the media reported that an increasing number of Quebecers are killing themselves by refusing food or fluids because they are ineligible for euthanasia. So this is the media saying that more people should be allowed euthanasia than are getting it now. And they're using the idea that people are
falsely using those things.
Well, they're using it by saying people are taking advantage of the right they had before euthanasia became legal to withhold food and fluids and to withdraw medical treatment in order to die on their own.
What's the difference? Before the law, we have already a case documented with film and question and everything, Gabriel Bouchard, before the law. What's the difference? Why before it was not so bad thing, and now it's absolutely awful?
Right, exactly. So they're basically saying that this is a terrible thing, that these people should be eligible for euthanasia, even though they were determined not to be eligible for euthanasia, that it's terrible that they had to go through this procedure, even though they're within their rights to do that. So, September 9th, 2016, the Quebec Oversight Commission is criticized for asking doctors for too much information after the death of their patients by euthanasia. Well, they have to get a lot of information in order to make sure that the doctors are complying with the law, that no people who are ineligible are being euthanized, that no people who are vulnerable are being induced to commit suicide. They have to get a lot of information also for people to study the phenomenon.
But no personal one. It's not something against somebody. It's needed because if you want to administrate those things properly, at long term, you need all the data possible to look what happened really.
Right, you need demographic information, and you also need to know about the process.
They do for major sickness or like comment ils appellent ça? Les maladies à déclaration obligatoire.
Je sais pas.
There's some sickness where it's obligated for the doctor to declare it to the government.
Right.
And there's many. And in all those cases, they collect a lot of data. Why death of somebody is less important than those sickness?
Right, exactly. And they also need to collect information on the nature of the suffering, because if people are asking for assisted suicide because they're not getting adequate pain relief, we need to know that so that people get better pain relief. But if they're asking for assisted suicide because they don't want to live in a nursing home, we need to know that so that we can make more home care available.
And all other situations, and there is many.
Right, exactly. September 19th, the Commission's impartiality is questioned because some of its members were, quote, not in favor, unquote, of euthanasia. And so somebody questioned whether the Commission is really impartial, because some people, less than half, opposed euthanasia before the law came into effect.
A committee could not be neutral.
Right.
It could be balanced. And that's exactly what the government tried to do by nominated plus or minus half on half, or people who promote the assisted suicide and the other who are against.
Or at least a couple who opposed.
Yeah, at least.
Half and half.
Make sure that you doesn't give the key to the wolf, to the
Hen house.
hen house.
Yeah.
not a good thing to do normally.
Right, exactly. But the media criticized the commission for not being neutral. And actually, this time, Gaitan Barrett came through. He said, well, of course it's neutral because it's balanced between people who did and did not approve of assisted suicide. So that was 1 point for him.
Yeah.
September 21st, Quebec's Minister of Health warns Quebec doctors who would follow the federal law C-14 that they are responsible for any legal consequences that may arise. So if they follow the federal law instead of the Quebec law, and Quebec decides to hold them, Quebec decides that they violated the Quebec law, Quebec could bring legal consequences against them.
In theory.
In theory.
But in practices, it's kind of impossible because if it go to the higher court, which is federal, they will win.
Right.
Okay.
But the problem is that this is another intimidation practice against the doctors that by the Minister of Health, and it's another way that he's trying to control the process of people being euthanized.
We live with a minister who work only by menaces.
Threats, yeah.
Threat people and organization, and he had his hand over the budget too. So he could do many threats to many people, and it seems that it's okay with the Prime Minister.
Right.
Oops.
Right. October 21st, 2016, one member of the Commission on the End-of-Life Care explains that the arrival of euthanasia exposes the Quebec palliative care community to a great risk of division and implosion because of the growing pressure to include euthanasia in its care settings.
Yeah.
And that pressure obviously is coming from Gaitan Barrett. And so this member of the commission is saying that this is having a very, very negative effect on palliative care doctors.
Yeah.
Who don't know what to do because the principle of not accelerating death is being violated.
And this is the main principle, and if you violate it, palliative care doesn't exist anymore.
Right, exactly. It's not palliative care. The person can't feel safe going into palliative care because they don't know if the doctor might decide to accelerate their death.
Yeah.
If one day they're feeling really bad and they say, oh, I can't deal with this anymore, I want to die.
They need some bed or any situation.
Right. They can't feel secure that the principle of not accelerating death would protect them. So that's the effect of the pressure that is being placed by Gaitan Barrett on the hospices to do euthanasia within their walls. October 27th, in its 9-month report, the Commission on End-of-Life Care announced that 262 Quebecers were euthanized as of September 1st. And another 263 people had been given terminal palliative sedation.
Yeah.
Or continuous palliative sedation.
You could tell it's more than 500 assisted death.
Right, exactly.
Looking the way you want, more than 5 people been killed in our hospital and institution here.
Right, exactly. And only 148 of those cases have been examined and ruled on by the Commission. 3 of those people were found to have been ineligible for euthanasia.
2%. And
Right.
in my book, when it's matter of life or death,
2%.
the only number that I want to see is 0.
Right,
Okay?
exactly.
And it is 2%. It's unacceptable at all.
Right. But the other thing we notice from these figures, first of all, they don't even look at the cases of continuous palliative sedation. And secondly, what we see is even after only 9 months, Quebec is already
Lagging by a third or more
of the cases.
cases.
Yeah, they haven't even examined a bunch of cases.
What will happen within 2 years or 5 years? think of it.
Right. Well, probably what's going to happen is they're not going to examine those cases, and there are going to be cases that fall through the cracks of people who were not eligible for euthanasia.
And understand one thing, that if you do something bad, either you are an institution or a doctor, what will happen to the report? You are not you are not forced to give those reports. So it will be just loose somewhere and nothing happened.
Right, exactly. Because for now, at least, institutions are reporting the number of euthanasias that happen within their walls. But what if they stop doing that? And so we only know how many euthanasias by the number of reports that come in from doctors.
And we will never have the bad one.
Right. Not all of the doctors are reporting the euthanasia.
So you look at the reports and say, oh, everything is nice and it's going very well. Oops, you just remove all the bad case from the basket, so it's looking nice.
Right. And the other thing we know from this is that in addition to those 3 people who were not eligible for assisted suicide, another 18 people, their cases were irregular because the second doctor who approved the euthanasia was not independent of the first doctor.
Simple, just remove this rule.
Right, exactly. That's the solution that Gaëtan Barrett came up with, is that instead of enforcing the rule, he's going to just remove it to make things easier for everybody. So, here's some ideas that appear regularly in the media coverage of euthanasia in Quebec. And these are ideas that the media puts forward, and obviously we don't agree with a lot of them, but this is what the media is trying to communicate to us. That euthanasia is preferable to natural death, which we don't agree with.
False, completely.
Right, exactly. That with palliative care, people's physical pain can be relieved, and also with services to live in the community, in their own homes, people can die with dignity if they have services that they control themselves.
Yeah.
Also, refused requests are always shocking. So the media is communicating that if somebody is found ineligible, that's a terrible thing.
That's false too.
Right, it's false, because if somebody's found ineligible, that means that they don't fit the law. That doesn't mean the law should change to fit them. It means that
it means they should receive palliative care and have a normal death. Right,
exactly. Right. It means that they are not one of the exceptional circumstances and exceptional cases.
Who made that the killing of people is a non-punishable act. Not it is right. It's a non-punishable. That's not the same.
Right, exactly. Another message that the media is putting out is that physicians in palliative care hospices are cruel and resistant to change when they refuse to kill their patients.
That's not true either.
That's not true. Their sole job is to relieve pain and suffering, and killing people is not relieving pain and suffering. Killing people is killing people. Relieving pain and suffering
and it's not care.
Right, is care. So it's not the case at all, but this is the message they're trying to put through. Also, doctors who practice euthanasia are heroes of the heart. That's the message they're
That's not true.
Trying to put through. That these doctors are some kind of hero because they're killing people. And that's certainly the message that this new television show called Mary Kills People is going to put out. That this lady is a hero because she's killing people. Also,
but life is not a TV show.
Right, exactly. But that's the media again putting out their message, their biased message about this issue. Also, people who choose to die by euthanasia are heroes. That's another message. and that they are masters of their own fate, which is not true, because they're asking a doctor to do something for them that they could do themselves, i.e. commit suicide. But they're putting the responsibility in somebody else's hands.
It's not getting control of your life.
Right, it's giving away.
You're just giving the control of your debt to somebody else.
Right, exactly. It's up to the doctor to decide if you're eligible. It's up to the doctor to do the act. You don't even do the act yourself. Also, the media is putting out the idea that people and their families are always in agreement about the decision to die, which is not true. Sometimes the family wants the person to die more than the person does.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the other way around.
And even if they are against, sometimes what happens when the person is already dead, what happened, most people say, oh, it's better like that, he's not suffer anymore, and they just do their grief.
Right.
And nobody came from the earth, from under the earth, and can make a complaint against a doctor. If they are dead.
Right, exactly. Right. It's irreversible. Nobody can make a complaint after they're dead. And it takes family to make a complaint, but families are too grief-stricken by the person's death to be able to make a complaint.
Yeah.
Also, the media puts out the idea that the medical team is always in perfect harmony with the family and the person who's making the request, which is also not true. There's differences between the medical team and the person and their families. So,
but at the end, because medical personnel normally are doing a great job, okay, what they do, they make sure that the family make a normal grief, and they talk the same way, so things arrange themselves. Even if the death of the people, the person was not exactly right.
right, exactly. So another idea that the media puts out is that the criteria of the law are too stringent. They're too strong. They're too tight.
That's false.
And they exclude too many people. And that's false. Actually, they're not tight enough, because we see already that 3 people who were not eligible were euthanized.
2%.
And we don't know if there's more people out there who...
2% that we know.
Right, that we know of. So we don't know of other situations, but we certainly know that there are people who may not be at the end of life, but they are asking for assisted suicide because they are stuck in a nursing home and they don't want to be there. And that's no reason for somebody to ask for assisted suicide or euthanasia. And the final idea that the media is putting out is that every precautionary measure is an obstacle to accessibility. That it's an obstacle to getting access to euthanasia. And that's not true, that the precautions are not an obstacle. People get euthanasia very quickly, even despite the precautions. The precautions are there to save lives, and if it saves a life to wait a few days, that shouldn't be a problem. If a person's that close to death, they can just withdraw the treatment and they could die in their sleep, or they could have continuous palliative sedation. So it's not it's not that big a sacrifice. And it's not, people are not losing access to euthanasia. Also, this is not what the media is putting out, but this is just my final comment on the subject. Meanwhile, cuts to direct services in nursing homes and home care result in poor quality care and inhumane conditions for people receiving these services. So during the first couple of years of their mandate, the Liberal government has cut both home services and nursing home services.
Yeah, and drastically.
A lot, drastically.
Many hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. And now they're wanting to add a little bit back to the nursing homes. Only, not to
$100 million
Right.
now. But they had cut something like $600 million in the past 2 years.
Right, and they're not adding back money to home care,
That's
even
all.
though they've been cut. And
They're still cutting home care.
they're still cutting home care, and that means people can't live in their own homes. It means people are still being forced to go into nursing homes.
Just read newspaper. It's all over the place. You couldn't miss if you read 2 or 3 days in a row, you will find a story about somewhere that somebody needs some home care and it could not have.
Well, the most recent case is Jonathan Marchand, who is a guy who's 40 years old. He has muscular dystrophy, and he's forced to live in a nursing home because
But he doesn't want.
He doesn't want to, because he has home care needs that aren't being met by the home care services. So he should be living at home. He's
Because
capable.
The place put the limit over the number of hours of services a week, and he's needed a little bit over, so he couldn't. They said, just go to the nursing home or die.
Right, exactly. That's the choice
That's a
people are getting.
Nice choice. It will happen to you. You're getting old.
Right, and people given that choice, oftentimes they want to die. They'd rather die than be stuck in a nursing home.
Yeah, because nursing home sometimes looks like the rules of a nursing home sometimes, and most of the time looks like prison rules.
Right, and one case last summer, Archie Rowland was a person with ALS, and he wasn't getting good care in the nursing home where he lived. And he wanted to live at home, but they wouldn't provide him care to live at home. And so he asked for and received euthanasia because he didn't want to live in a nursing home. The conditions were too bad there.
Those things are very documented case. And there's many cases not documented, but exactly like that one.
Right. Okay. Our next topic is Ottawa commits to the CRPD optional protocol.
Good news!
Yay! And again, the CRPD is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Honorable Stéphane Dion, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Honorable Carla Qualtrough, Minister of Sport and Persons with Disabilities.
Bizarre.
Why they put those together.
Yeah, sport and disability.
Probably they said, well, neither of them is very important, so we'll stick them together. They announced on December 1st that the Government of Canada has begun a consultation process on Canada's accession to the United Nations Optional Protocol to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. And it's called the Optional Protocol for short. So this is good news because it basically puts the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities into effect because it makes it possible for people to make complaints under the CRPD. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities protects and promotes the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities without discrimination and on an equal basis with others. So it provides a whole series of rights, like the right to rehabilitation, the right to education, the right to live independently, all sorts of the right to employment, all kinds of rights on an equal basis to people without disabilities. So it's a really important convention. And it was ratified in 2010 by the Harper government, but they subsequently did nothing.
It had been announced by 2 major ministers.
Right.
And what happened? Nobody had talked about it.
Nobody covered it.
No news, no TV, no radio, no nothing.
Right. I did a Google search afterwards for the words optional protocol and CRPD and to see if I could find any articles about it. And all I found was
it's a major announcement,
release.
and even there was journalists on place, and nobody talk about it.
Right.
Not important enough. But Canadians win that night.
Right. Because there are 15% of people with Canadians who are people with disabilities, and those 15% have friends and family.
And this number increases every year. Why?
Right.
Because the population
Is
getting
aging.
old,
Yeah.
aging. Okay.
Yeah. Provinces and territories have an important role to play in considering Canada's possible exception to the optional protocol, and actually in compliance with the CRPD in general. And consultations are currently taking place with them on this matter. The process will also involve talks with Indigenous government that may be implicated, as well as Indigenous organizations and civil society. And the reason that the federal government has to talk to provincial governments and Indigenous governments is because a lot of the rights that are guaranteed under the convention are rights that affect provincial government jurisdiction and Indigenous government jurisdiction.
Yeah. It's the responsibility of the province, all those social things.
Education, and health,
yeah,
social services.
All those things are provincial responsibility, not
right.
federal. But federal have the international law and relations. Sorry, that right. was the thing that I was saying. International relations are federal. So United Nations is federal. The signing is federal, but the responsibility is provincial.
Right.
Which
well,
is
the federal government is responsible for Canada complying.
Yeah.
So the federal government has to make the provinces comply with the
which
federal,
is not exactly easy.
Right. It's not going to be easy. So that's why it's a negotiation with the provinces. The announcement came at a press conference held during a meeting of disability advocates working on a report to the Canadian government on progress on implementing the CRPD. And like Christian said, there were media there. There was this foreign minister there, and Minister Qualtrough was there, but there was nothing in the media about it.
And it was CCD, which is the biggest organization of handicapped people in Canada.
Right.
And nobody talk about it.
Right.
Probably because we doesn't occupy bridge or road or cut a railway. I don't know. Probably that was the reason.
Right. Canada ratified the CRPD in 2010. Parties to the convention are required to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights by persons with disabilities. And as I said before, the Harper government has done nothing to promote those rights. So that's why it's important to sign this optional protocol and to put it into effect. The Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is a body of independent experts that monitors the implementation of the convention by states parties, which means countries whose governments have ratified the convention. States parties to the convention are expected to submit reports to the committee every 4 years, with an initial report due 2 years after ratification. Canada submitted its initial report in February of 2014 and will appear before the committee in spring of 2017. So that next spring, Canada has to go before this committee and say what it's done. And
it will have an improvement.
Right.
We had signed the protocol.
Right. We signed the protocol, and we now have a minister for persons with disabilities. Yeah. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
The optional protocol gives people with disabilities new safeguards for their rights by establishing 2 procedures aimed at strengthening the implementation and monitoring of the convention. The first is a complaint procedure that allows individuals and groups to bring petitions to the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, claiming that their rights under the convention have been violated. So if, for example, some group feels that education rights have been violated, they can bring a complaint, or the right to independent living has been violated because Canada gives too much money to nursing homes and not enough to community-based care. They can bring a complaint before this United Nations committee, and that committee will then have to investigate. It's the inquiry procedure that gives the committee authority to investigate allegations of grave or systemic violations of the provisions of the convention by a state party. And in England, this is what happened because the employment benefits program that they have where people can't work and are trying to get benefits, it was so strict and so corrupt that people brought a complaint. And there have been so many cuts to social programs that people brought a complaint, and there was an inquiry by this committee, and they found that England was in violation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
So there is some power.
Right, so it does actually work. The optional protocol was adopted by the United Nations in 2006, so it's the 10th anniversary, and entered into force in 2008. As of November 16th, there are 92 states parties to the protocol. And I was going to say something and now I forgot.
When we get old, that's what happens.
That's what happens. Senior moment. Okay. If you want more information about the topics we talk about here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujourvivant not dead yet. You can go to our website, which is tvndy.ca. You can send us an email at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow me on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks very much to Christian for helping out.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks to you for being there.
See you next week.
See you next
Same
time.
hour. Bye.
Bye.